If it's green, it's good. If it's gorgeous, it's good. It's good in its own place in the world. Let's examine what happens when we take something from its natural habitat, where natural controls or checks and balances exist, and it's really just a small part of the big picture, and take it to another habitat where it becomes an overwhelming part of the picture. Plants introduced into a region by humans are called exotics. Exotics are not a part of the native landscape. Exotics are plants out of place. The impact of invasive alien plant species on the environment has caused scientists to describe the problem as biological pollution. Not all exotic plants are pests, such as this persimmon tree from Asia, which produces larger, sweeter persimmons than the native persimmon tree. 98% of the U.S. food supply, including wheat and rice, comes from introduced species. Exotic pest plants have intrusive characteristics and are the second most significant threat to wildlife because they spread rampantly, grow rapidly, and reproduce precociously. In competition for resources such as the sun, water, and soil, the invasive alien plants choke out native plants. Biological diversity is reduced as native species fail to survive the green scourge. Biological diversity is further impacted when exotic plants harbor other organisms that decimate native species. Let's look at some examples of invasive exotic pest plant introductions. 73 million kudzu seedlings were planted in 1935 by the U.S. Soil Conservation Service to control soil erosion along road cuts in the South. Kudzu was introduced from China and has since spread, smothering and degrading vast numbers of southern ecosystems. Japanese honeysuckle was introduced as an ornamental plant in 1806. In the early 1900s, similar measures were taken by the railroads to plant Japanese honeysuckle along railroad embankments to control soil erosion. Chinese yam is another invasive plant native to China. Introduced to the United States as an ornamental or edible food crop in the 1800s, it escaped cultivation and has been identified in most of the eastern United States. Not all exotics were brought here deliberately. Even before the influx of English settlers, purple loosestrife seeds arrived here in soils used in the ballasts of ships. A strikingly handsome plant with magenta flowers on showy spikes reaching 5 or 6 feet in height, purple loosestrife has more than 100 species of insects that control it in its native European range. In North America, its biological controls are absent, and it's a dangerous competitor. Once it escapes cultivation, it turns wetland into wastelands. A single plant can produce more than 2 million seeds per year. Each seed can be viable in the soil for 20 years. Waterfowl are displaced along with native wetland plants as food sources disappear. Damage to agriculture and wildlife in the Northeast and Midwest alone costs tens of millions of dollars. Tree of Heaven is an invasive exotic tree brought to this country by immigrants from Asia for cultural purposes. A distinctive characteristic about this tree is that the leaves smell like a skunk when crushed. Typical of an invasive exotic, Tree of Heaven can grow just about anywhere. This aggressive tree can be observed growing where no other large plant would dare to grow, seen here growing inside a shop window in a downtown area. Another aggressive exotic, mile-a-minute weed, will even compete with automobiles. This herbaceous vine will literally take over a parking lot. The list of invasive exotic plants is unfortunately lengthy. You may even recognize some of the plants growing in your backyard on this list. We have only recently become aware how these plants out of place impact natural communities. Natural communities are interdependent and made up of many different types of organisms, or in other words, they are biologically diverse. Competition for resources such as water, light, space, and food in a natural system is ongoing. plants and animals that have evolved together in an ecosystem compete for limited resources through their own specializations. These specializations are adaptations that allow them to successfully compete and survive. The role or niche that a particular species maintains is connected to other species in that ecosystem. The importance of this relationship is that this provides resources for each kind of organism in that particular ecosystem. Invasion of natural areas by exotic species creates shortages of resources for native species. Like a sour note in a symphony, exotic interlopers disrupt the harmonic balance in a natural system. Invasive exotic plants leave behind natural controls and can grow and mature rapidly. They have prolific reproductive capacities and are successful in seed dispersal, germination, and colonization.
This is a close-up of Chinese yam, and you can see the bulbils, which are, they're also called air potatoes. There are 2 per node, and the node is the place on the stem at which the leaves occur. And so right here you can see 2 nodes and 4 bulbils. I knocked a couple off, unfortunately. But the plants can be many feet long, and each node will have bulbils, so it is highly productive. This is vegetative reproduction. So these will drop. They can sprout a new plant in this year, and if they drop early enough, those plants can actually produce bulbils. So you can actually have 3 generations in a year. You can also see the flowers. So in this country, we only have, I believe it's male plants. Either way, it's only one gender, not both male and female. So we don't have sexual reproduction in the plants that occur here. It's all vegetative. And these bulbils will, this area floods where we're standing on the greenway right now. The water picks up the bulbils in the winter and the early spring and moves them down the Stones River and will deposit them in a low spot along the river. So in an area just like this, it's pretty easy to find Chinese yam because you know where it's going to land, basically, where it gets caught. The water recedes, the bulbils sprout, and you get a new occurrence of it. And you can see it's got this habit of growing over the other plants, so it prevents sun from reaching the plants underneath it, and the weight can actually knock plants down. But it's mainly the competition for light and nutrients that makes this so successful, and it can outcompete the plants it's crawling over.
The result of this competitive edge is that they displace wildlife that depends on native vegetation. It's the plant community that defines the animal population in a natural system. A threat to native plants is a threat to native wildlife. Although corridors through which invasive exotics have been brought into this country are very different, the results of these introductions have the same impact. Examining how these plants out of place were initially brought here will help prevent future introductions. Some introductions were accidental. An example of this is purple loosestrife, which was discussed earlier. There are many instances where introductions have been deliberate for things such as ornamental plantings or erosion control. Examples are Chinese yam, kudzu, honeysuckle, multiflora rose, and many others. We are now battling the plants out of place with the same manpower with which they were planted in the first place. Commercially, some exotics with invasive characteristics are profitable because they grow rapidly and have a high survival rate. Tourists and travelers are notorious for finding plant souvenirs on vacation and transporting potential invasive alien plants in their suitcases and pockets. Other invasive exotic plants have been part of the natural landscape for so long, no one knows how they were initially introduced. Paulownia, native to China, is rumored to have been introduced to Delaware in the mid-1800s, when Admiral DuPont returned from a trip to China with a number of porcelain jars packed in crates stuffed with Paulownia seed pods to cushion against breakage. The 20,000 wind-borne seeds in each pod spread Paulownia over most of the eastern U.S. The cost to maintain natural areas is high. Federal wildlands lose thousands of acres per day to invasive pest plants. Dr. Randy Westbrooks, invasive species prevention specialist from USGS, explains.
A lot of exotic plants cost millions and millions of dollars in damage to agriculture. About 75% of the weeds in our country that are agricultural weeds come from another country. So those being exotic pest plants, we certainly don't need any more of them.
Agricultural systems have dealt with pest plants for years with chemical applications. Eradication programs that involve physical removal of pest plant vegetation and root systems early in growth have been fairly successful in some urban areas. However, the magnitude of the exotic invasion in vast natural areas like the Great Smoky Mountain National Park makes physical removal strategies like hand-pulling, digging up rootstock, and cutting an ongoing task. Selective use of chemicals is an option when the only alternative is loss of native habitat from invading species. Chemical herbicides are used selectively and applied in a manner that will have the least toxic effect on non-target plants and wildlife.
Some of the species need more herbicide than others because they have a waxy cuticle, and you have to have a way to penetrate that. We use a surfactant. We've used several different kinds.
Planting only native plants in highway and landscaping practices is a critical part of preventing exotic introductions. Public education about this silent form of biological pollution will prevent careless planting practices. Organizations such as the Exotic Pest Plant Council facilitate communication and education.
There's so much to be done. I don't think any of us, any agency, could do it without volunteers. And what we see behind me is the result of volunteer efforts from the year 2003. I think that's when we started at this site. So lots and lots of people have donated their time. We've learned the importance of planting native plants in place of the invasives that we remove because they provide competition for the invasive species. And they're missing because the invasive species had occupied their space. So over time we've planted more than 17 species of native plants. We started with grasses because we could more easily control the invasive Chinese yam and Chinese privet.
We feel that Tennessee's natural heritage should be protected, and we're doing our part to help it.
We removed all the exotics that are not native to our area or not originally from our area, and we planted some plants that were originally from this area so they could grow and be in their natural habitat.
I'm going to the Chamber of Commerce with my group, and we're going to go appeal for the Chamber of Commerce to plant native. There are a bunch of other groups too.
The things you can do to help are get involved and support organizations that protect biodiversity. Volunteer in a program to remove invasive plants. Plant native plants. Ask your nursery to stock propagated native plants. Green is good. You see, this is what we want to preserve. So is this. It's a clear choice to protect our natural heritage. We are all a part of, not apart from, Earth's web of life. We may not see all the connections right now. Therefore, we will not miss them until they're gone.